Hi, everybody. I'm just going to get right into it. So today I'll be talking about how we go about mapping the opportunity areas for tree planting in Scotland and try and put that in the context of 2045 net zero emission targets and beyond and up to 2080 and see, changing the time to net zero making a difference in terms of the design that we're looking at. So the technical kind of part of sort of under the hood of this work is already out there and currently being reviewed in this paper. And as you can see, it's let me actually change. That's better. So it's currently open for discussion. So if you have an interest in the topic, feel free to be a reviewer. You can do that anonymously. So yeah, it's up there if you're just interested in what goes on in our modeling sort of stuff side of things, or you want to become a reviewer for this paper, feel free to do so. So although I'm not going into the details of how we've modeled things because I've already presented that in the previous webinars, but I thought it might be important to at least introduce the key pieces of data that kind of underpins the results you're about to see. One of the key pieces of data is the future climate projection data, for which we use the Chescape dataset published in this paper, as you can see in the top of the screen. It includes 4 representative concentration pathways. As you can see on the left, a pessimistic scenario, a realistic, an optimistic, and a very optimistic one. And at the moment, we're only using RCP6. The number 6 here simply represents the difference in sort of watts per square meter of radiation coming into the Earth and leaving the Earth. So 6 means that less is leaving the Earth than is coming in, hence sort of the global warming impact. So on the top row, we're looking at precipitation, potential of transpiration and temperature at year 2080. And in the bottom row, we're looking at the difference relative to this year, in case anybody had any doubt that, there's global warming. The other key piece of data is soil carbon estimates, for which we use, again, it's published in this paper. And this data set, sort of, we use it to represent the conditions now, in the sense that these are the conditions before we plant any trees. This is how much carbon we estimate to have in the soil in Scotland, which is just over 3,000 megatons, with a median value of 362 megatons. The other important piece of data that really has a strong say in our results is the yield curves for the 2 species we consider here, Sitka and birch. The choice of species really has mainly been constrained by the time we've had and the data that was already available without having to spend more time rather than anything else. So ideally, we would like to test more species, but at the moment, this is what we've had data available for. But at least we're trying a conifer and a broadleaf species. So this data is from Woodland Carbon Code, and these are at forestry densities, as you can see in the top. So we basically have, for each spatial location, we know which tree grows at what rate, and each of these yield classes correspond to a yield curve, as you can see on the right-hand side. But obviously, for agroforestry, we don't really consider the forestry density, so we need to somehow convert those yield curves into more agroforestry like scenarios. And to do that, we use this sort of a self-thinning relationship from this paper, that we take the original woodland carbon code yield curves and convert them into lower plantation densities. And note that when we do that, the highest yield class of birch seems to be growing faster than highest yield class of Sitka, which was initially surprising to me because I guess I expected Sitka to grow faster, but some of the yield classes of Sitka grow faster than some of the yield classes of birch. And I pointed that out because you'll see why it might be important in the later slides. So then once we feed all those data into the model, then we can ask different kinds of questions. For example, under the current future climate trajectories and given the two species that I just introduced and the plantation densities considered, and according to our modeling, which is important, so what species density location combination across Scotland will give the maximum possible impact by 2045? What about by 2080? And there's also a subset of two questions that might be important. What is the maximum possible impact? And how many trees does that translate to? So when we, but first, I think we should probably have a look at or answer this question. What is the trajectory of soil carbon storage in Scotland? Again, according to our modeling. And to do that, so here I've divided Scotland into 4 different zones using the 3 famous fault lines in Scotland to 4 zones of somewhat geologically distinct character. And now in each panel on the bottom, we're looking at the megaton per year of carbon loss in each zone, according to our modeling. Again, the wider band represents sort of the uncertainty, the climate data and modeling parameters and so on. And what we see is that the trend is downward in all 4 zones, but more so in the blue and green zone, which actually are the areas that contain more of the carbon in Scotland. So that's probably not good, meaning that these areas where most of the carbon is are actually more susceptible to global warming. And on the panel on the right-hand side, we see the total Scotland sort of baseline emission from the soil. This is not the type of emission that's normally included in figures like this, I think, where the emissions are assumed based on the current mitigation strategies and future climate data, but not necessarily how much we think we might be losing from the soil due to global warming. So in the results that you'll see in a second, I'm also adding this extra that comes from the right-hand side panel for 2045 and 2080. We stacked that on top of this sort of the net zero targets for Scotland for different sectors. But perhaps it should be actually added to the agriculture sector's targets because, and my thinking here is that, well, all other sectors have been improving and have been going down with time in terms of their emission, but it seems like the agricultural sector has been emitting a constant amount of nearly 8 megatons per year over the past 2 decades. So although, yes, this is due to global warming and rise in temperatures and changes in precipitation patterns, but perhaps if the agricultural sector had kind of contributed the same as other sectors, then this would have already been compensated for. But either way, that's perhaps a debate for another day. But we stack these extra values that we get from soil carbon emission loss on top of what we think we should meet by 2045. So back to the first question. So what species density location combination will give the max possible impact by 2045 and 2008? Well, to get the max possible impact, then this is the sort of spatial pattern our modeling comes up with, and it's effectively saying plaster Scotland with forestry densities of birch, and in some areas, forestry densities of sitka. And you're probably thinking, well, that's a ridiculous scenario, and you're absolutely right, because that means we've got to turn Scotland into a rainforest effectively. But the point of this exercise is really that to calculate a theoretical maximum possible impact through that's theoretically possible through planting tree. And it seems that that impact, we can actually meet 100% of the Scottish emission targets by 2045 if we planted over 6.8 billion trees in Scotland, and according to this pattern. But what about by 2080? So if we optimize for 2080, then we get a totally different story. So if we want the maximum impact by a different year, then we've got to kind of follow this pattern of plantation, and we would need over 12 billion trees to kind of mitigate nearly 4 times the Scottish emission targets by 2008. So let's exclude the forestry densities, because in agroforestry we don't consider that sort of density. So what sort of combination will deliver the maximum impact then? Again, it's a similar story, but if we're optimizing for 2045 emission targets, then birch seems to be the go-to option, because it seems to grow slightly faster. And we can meet 58% of the targets by 2045. Again, if we optimize for 2080, then we get a different pattern. We got to plant sitka in a lot of areas where birch doesn't grow as fast. And if we do that, we can actually meet 167% with over 2 billion trees to plant. Again, these scenarios are not really having a footing in reality as far as I know, but again, it's to estimate a theoretical upper bound. And so we keep going down the density, sort of plantation densities. Now, if we exclude the upper bound, the 400 of the agroforestry densities, very similar story. For 2045, mostly birch at 100 stems per hectare density, with some areas with sitka 100 stems per hectare, and we can meet 224% of the targets by 2045, and with a different pattern, 67% if you're only considering densities up to 100 stems per hectare. So again, going down to 25, very similar story, except that we can only meet 8.3% of the target by 45 and 23% by 2008. So far, I guess the key point of this exercise is to show that if the year for which we optimize our design has a big say in terms of what sort of pattern of plantation you should follow. So meaning that if you go for 2045, you might not get the best result later down the line. If you go for later down the line, you might not meet the targets that we've set at 2045. So let's ask perhaps a more realistic question. It's probably not fair to expect tree planting to carry the load for Scotland, in that we expect it to mitigate the entire 40 megaton plus a year of emission. So what about we hold it accountable for the agricultural sector's emission? Then what sort of pattern do we think we should plant in Scotland for the different dates? And if we did that, then if we also bring back the forestry densities, then we only need to plant in these areas, which is probably in the prime agricultural land, so that's never going to happen. But nevertheless, if we did that, then we can meet 100% of the emission targets by agricultural sector's emission target by 45, and we need 700 plus million trees. But again, for 2080, as you can see, the spatial patterns of plantation should be different, but also the species and also the number of trees. So everything changes if you change the magnitude of the target that you want to meet, which is now the agri sector's net zero emission target, but also the date, which is kind of the point I'm trying to highlight here, that how do we go about optimizing for this problem of where to plant that tree? So again, we go down the density kind of line, and now we exclude forestry. Now these are the areas we should plant birch and with basically very little Sitka, and we can still meet 100% of the targets by the agricultural sector's emissions by 2045. Again, completely different pattern and sort of species combinations if we're aiming for 2080. And we can still meet the targets by 2080 with actually much fewer number of trees, 260 million of them. Again, let's exclude the 400, which is the upper bound for what you might consider agroforestry. And if we did that, we suddenly need a much larger area to plant, mostly birch with some Sitka, to meet 100% of the 2045 target. We'd need 500 million trees in total. Again, for 2080, we'd need to plant in a much smaller area, most of which, again, are prime agricultural land. So, again, these are not necessarily realistic scenarios, just trying to put things into numbers. And we can still meet 100% of the targets, agricultural sector's emissions. But if we went down to only consider 25 stems per hectare densities, then again, the area size on which we got to plant trees suddenly expand much wider to pretty much entire Scotland. And we can no longer actually meet the targets by 2045. Neither can we by 2080. So there's always a compromise. If we limit the area size, then we have to increase obviously our plantation density. So there's so many parameters that once you change one of them, then your design might change. But nonetheless, so let's say we opted for this design. We said, okay, we think we want to aim for 2080 agricultural net zero emission target. Then according to our sort of modeling, this is the scenario you should go for. And if you did that, then from our model, we can also check impacts of that scenario on water cycling. So here we can see what sort of change we expect in terms of annual evapotranspiration, or changing peak flow, which might have implication in some areas for flooding if that's important, or changing dry season flow. Again, that could have implication under sort of a drought scenario for river flow regulation and things like that, or a change in maximum soil sort of moisture deficit or soil dryness that could have implication for if you co-cropping. I know we haven't shown any arable or silver arable agroforestry, but these are the type of output we can get from our model. It could also be important for example, for forage growth in a silvopastoral system and things like that. So all of the stuff that you've seen so far will soon go into our farm tree web tool. I'll put a link here for the beta version. You can just copy this link into your browser, and you need these username and password. And then you can, so in the tool, you can choose the Scottish zones that you're interested. So here I've chosen zone 1, which is Aberdeenshire. And for that zone, then you'll be given a list of options to choose from. The yellow ones are positive impact, the blue ones are negative impact. So if you want to avoid areas where it might lead to carbon loss, you select that if that's important for you. And so on. If you care about flood risk, you select the number of options that you want. And in the future, as I said, for example, the species that I've modeled and the plantation densities, those will all be added into this list where you can select in terms of the criteria you're interested in. Once you've done that, you can also weight the criteria based on the importance to you, and you can play around with them to see what sort of suitability score you will get for the area that you've chosen and based on the criteria weightings that you've selected. So the link is in here. I'll post it. I don't know if there will be a scope for people accessing the slides, but I'll try to paste the link into the chat in case you're interested. So for me, the key takeaway from today's talk is that what I'm trying to show is that it's an optimization problem, and I've put kind of a schematic here for the factors I've considered here, but this is not even half the number of variables and parameters that would go into the optimization if you start especially bringing in the socio-economic factors and so on. But at the end of the day, what's the best spatial pattern of plantation is an optimization problem. And if you change the net zero targets, for example, if you want to meet the entire Scotland targets, you get a different pattern. But if you want to only meet the agricultural sector's emissions, then you get a different target. If you change the time to net zero, you get a different target. If you have a constraint in terms of some species have to be in particular locations based on, I'm not sure, farmers' preferences or other consideration, again, you get a different. So you change anything in here, if you have a constraint on cost or the number of trees we can afford to plant, then you get a different sort of pattern. So for the discussion, I would like to get your insights on how do you think we should go about this optimization? What are your thoughts on that front? And what more realistic scenarios would you want to see? And how do you sort of define the realistic scenarios, from your point of view? What the other species you would ideally want to see? This is not something I can promise we can deliver, because my contract's finishing basically end of the year, so we have until then to gather the data, rerun the model, and analyze and so on. But if we had to run one or two more species, what would it be for you? What do you think would be most usable, most useful? And also, what other constraint do you think we should put in? For example, if we included the farm types or any other constraint, any areas we should exclude, any areas we should weight in a different way. So it would be great if I could get your thoughts on these stuff. So write down your thoughts and comments for the discussion section. That would be great. And just some contacts and links. That's all from me. I'll hand over to Albert, which will talk about the socioeconomic stuff.
Thank you very much, Salim, for your presentation and handing it over to me. I'm not sure if you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, good, man. Fantastic. So I'm just going to be talking about the other part of the project, which is the socio-economic side of it. So I'll mainly be focusing on barriers and opportunities to increasing agroforestry in Scotland. So perhaps I'll just start with um, um, I'll just start with the research process. So we have interviewed 31 farmers and crofters across Scotland. 10 of them are those who are not practicing agroforestry right now on their farms. These farmers have different they have different characteristics, as I'll be showing you on the next slide. But we have also used the theory of plant behavior to kind of put some of our findings in context. I haven't done, or I haven't showed much of it here, but you see some of the results we'll be talking about that. So first of all, most of our participants, the majority of them were ranged from the age of 50 to 69. There were a few who were in their 30s and 40s. In terms of occupation and whether they do something else, because this also has an impact in terms of the choices made for or against agroforestry.
Albert, can I just interrupt you? Sorry for 1 second. Can you put the slides in full screen mode? Because I think they're not moving on.
Okay.
Okay.
So I have it's probably because you are seeing my first screen. Okay. Can you see the full screen now?
No, not yet. We've still got your panel down the left.
Oh.
Sorry, I don't know how to help you on that. If anyone does, please pop in.
Yeah, that's weird because it's showing full screen on my screen, both of them. I'm using two.
Can you go to slideshow and start slideshow?
Yeah.
I imagine that's what you've been doing, but
Yeah, so
have you tried that way? Just slideshow at the top. I imagine you have, but if not, do you want to try that? Oh, something changed.
yeah, I have tried doing that. I'm not sure if
Okay.
it's changed
I'm afraid it's still the same as it was.
now.
Is anybody able to offer Albert any advice on this? Because I'm not.
Yeah, okay. I'll just end the show and then try again.
Okay.
Yeah.
That looks more promising.
Has that changed?
No, it hasn't. Will it allow you to? The main slide has changed. We've gone one slide further on. We're now on participants'
Yeah.
characteristics.
Can you? Oh, so you can see characteristics. Can you see my next slide, or you can just see that one?
We can now see participants' characteristics, and we've still got the list of slides down the left.
Yeah, is that in full screen?
No, I mean it's the larger part, but it's not full screen.
Yeah, that's weird.
It's quite okay if you just
Yeah, we
can
can.
present it like that without full screen because we can see everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can see if you can see in full screen, then
We can see it as long as you can switch between slides. This is absolutely fine as a view.
yeah. Okay. Right. So shall I go ahead then?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so.
Right. Sure, you can see or hear me. Yeah. So we some of the people that we spoke with are people who have background in agriculture, possibly by growing up on the farm, or maybe they have some experience because they've been involved in farming for some time. Others also have background in forestry, as well as environmental conservation and other professions. Um, so in terms of opportunities, there are a number of opportunities for tree planting. I'll start off with this one, which is kind of public knowledge right now. You can check online and you find this. Over 80% of the land in Scotland is actually under agriculture. So that is like a huge potential for increasing agroforestry in Scotland. But of course, the decisions whether to plant trees or not depend on the individual farmers, which will be talked about in a few minutes from now. So the positive perceptions also exist that a number of farmers have, whether they are actually practicing agroforestry right now or not. Most of the farmers that I spoke with actually have positive perceptions regarding trees or planting trees on farmland. Um, so, for example, some of the people, both those who have planted trees and those who have not, they have mentioned some of the importance of planting trees. For example, biodiversity, planting for livestock, um, beautiful landscapes, as well as carbon sequestration. So there is existing positive perception towards tree planting, although the other perceptions also exist, as I'll show you in the next slides. There are other opportunities as well because of, for example, market forces. There are some farmers who have mentioned of the possibility of future markets demanding that food is sustainably produced, and so sort of planting trees or involving themselves in agroforestry would also help them to achieve that. There are other farms which have actually increased tree coverage on their farms because of things like recognitions or awards, grant schemes as well. They have also been mentioned as some of the reasons that farmers would definitely decide to plant trees. So in terms of barriers, there are several of them. Most of these have been classified into few groups. There are those that are to do with policy. There are those to do with financial, the financial side of it. There are other barriers that are to do with knowledge in general, as well as perceptions that also drive the behavior, whether to plant trees or not. So I'll just go straight into this. For example, insufficient knowledge. Most of the farmers who would often think of planting trees, including those who are already planting trees, they have mentioned that in the beginning of their decision to plant trees, the lack of knowledge regarding different aspects of tree planting was or is one of the biggest challenges for them. this sort of a barrier has so farmers questioning things like what type of tree species can we plant for which outcome. I think my colleague was sort of trying to do that optimization and the modeling part to do with that.
Sorry, Albert, I think your slides aren't moving again. I don't know if you're using full screen. If you can maybe not use that, maybe it will help.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I wonder whether it's worth going into, as Elliot suggested, going to editing view rather than showing screens. So just show them as though you were still working on them, and then go through them one by one.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah, we can see
Yeah.
insufficient knowledge now and 5 blue
Yeah.
boxes.
Okay. So is that better then?
Well, we can see it in the same way as before. It's just making sure that we can then see the next one when you move on.
Okay.
So,
Right. Okay. Yeah.
right,
So
sorry this is happening.
yeah. That's okay. That's okay. So I'll go on. So some of the issues include losses due to natural disasters, so things like diseases, storms. Farmers still have questions. What happens if I plant my tree that they're going to survive? If I invest my money in this, is it worth doing so? Or am I going to lose my investment into this? Or even am I going to see some benefits of engaging in tree planting? Where do I get support, for example, in terms of, so say, for example, if you have an issue with your trees, where do you get the advice from? Do you have to pay? Can you get it for free? Can you get it on time? So questions like those. So some of the codes that have been mentioned so far, I've included them here, but because we have already taken up a bit more time, so I'm gonna skip those. The issue to do with lack of knowledge or insufficient knowledge in tree planting in general and agroforestry to be specific, we have developed this tool which is called the farm tree info tool. What this tool does is it provides case studies of farmers and crofters who have already or who are practicing agroforestry in different locations across Scotland. So you see that the map here has different colors in terms of the dots. The dots representing farms. So if you could click on one of those, it's going to give you information, the name of the farm, the type of that farm, the type of trees that are planted, the planting design itself, whether they've got support from any grant providers or whether they get any non-financial support, including challenges that they have faced in doing their tree planting or even maintaining the trees that they have on their farms. I have something that you can scan from here. Not sure if it's visible properly. I'm not sure if you can see. Can you see that, Salim?
I'm still on the farm tree info tool.
Oh, you're still there.
And now I can see the QR code.
Okay, right. So if you can scan that, that will take you to the farm tree info tool. Then you can look at how it works. If you would like, you can provide us with some feedback, as well as suggestions that you might think of. Of course, I'm speaking about this, but I want to be able to change much in terms of the info tree itself because of limited time. Okay, so I would like to just move on. There are some negative perceptions regarding tree planting. One of them is the fact that there are farmers who believe that a tree planting is not the best way to go about it. So one of them has actually said that it might even be better to kind of try and grow crops or even grasses sustainably instead of encouraging farmers to plant more trees. There are others who also hold the view that Scottish agriculture is already sustainable, and so the push to plant more trees for sustainability is not really a correct point of view. Of course, there is also the common perception that agroforestry will take up agricultural land, but as we have seen, much of the land in Scotland is not that suitable for growing crops. I'm not sure if you can still see my slides, but I'm moving on to the next barrier. The next barrier is farmers who don't own the land, so tenant farmers.
Yeah,
So
we
for
can see
tenant
that on
farmers,
you.
okay, good. Yeah, so tenant farmers are the most disadvantaged in Scotland in terms of tree planting. For one, because they have to get a written or explicit consent from the landowners for them to engage in tree planting. So they kind of have like really little options in terms of what they could do. And of course, there is also there's also preference for landowners to go for shorter tenancies, and so this is mostly to do with the uncertainties to do with the policy landscape. What if the policy changes and then I have less control over the land that I own, and things to do with the right to buy, as well as other issues. So shorter tenancies also has an implication in terms of whether one is able to apply for grant schemes or not. For example, the first grant scheme has contract periods of about 20 years. So if your tenancy agreement is less than that, then you are not eligible to apply for the grant money. And so then if you depend on grant money, you are not going to plant trees if that's what you depend on. So there is also an aspect of, so say, for example, the landowner says, oh, yes, you can plant trees. If you want to plant trees here, plant trees there. But how are you going to share the benefits? The one planting trees does not own the land. So there's an aspect of providing a legal basis for sharing the benefits, which has been suggested in the consultation paper by the Scottish government. They have named it the land use model, which seem to have potential to change this so that tenant farmers can start planting trees. There have also been issues to do with the forestry grant scheme, to be specific. So farmers who are looking for grant money, they have often talked about these grant schemes being too prescriptive. So in terms of telling the farmer what species they can plant in a certain location based on some existing knowledge. So the complex application process has also been mentioned, and most of these have actually been sorted out right now because of the changes that that the Scottish Government has introduced in 2024. Notably, the densities have been previously it was the agroforestry only had two options. Of course, it's still two options now, but in terms of the density, the planting density, it was only 200 trees per hectare before, and 400 hectares being the second option. Right now, that has been changed to between 150 trees to 200 trees per hectare. So that's like an option one. And option two has also been changed to say 300 to 400 trees per hectare. And you can also see from my slide, if you're able to see that, that the payment rates have also been increased, which is really good news. But the question remains how, to what extent are these changes helpful for farmers who want to plant trees and really depend on grant schemes and money from this. They have also removed restrictions in terms of whether you can have cattle on your agroforestry plot being funded by these grant schemes. So right now, before it was really strict to say you cannot have you cannot have cattle on that plot. Right now, this has been given as the responsibility of the farmer to protect the trees if they want to have cattle on that plot and others. So changes are there, but the question remains to what extent these have been helpful or will be helpful to most of the farmers. So I would like also to just talk about this. It also seemed from our analysis, it also seemed that different farmers respond differently to different barriers. So as you can see from the table here, if you can see it, if you can see this table, it shows how different farmers respond to different barriers. I've only picked three types of barriers here.
Yeah, we can see it, just to reassure you.
Okay, good. So you can see grant schemes. So, for example, if grant schemes are too prescriptive or complex with low payment rates, they have issues to do with cash flow and decision making. So, what are the scenarios or what are the decisions that farmers often make regarding tree planting if they depended on that? So, for example, some of the farmers would want to just forego funding and just stick to their to their tree planting preferences. In most cases, these are like farmers who often have strong personal preferences in terms of trees. For example, what tree species grow in their area or on their land, to be specific. So these are also farmers who often have like specific outcomes that they want to see. So they know they know what tree species is going to work on their farm and possibly in what combination. So those ones, if grant schemes would be too difficult, they would rather leave it and just plant according to their plans. The others who choose to modify planting their planting plans to accommodate funding conditions. Often these would be those who still have strong preferences for tree planting, what they want to do on their farm, but they still want that grant money to help them. There are others who would rather abandon and just completely stop tree planting, possibly because they don't have much of the motivation themselves. So the grant money was playing a bigger part in terms of motivating them to plant and so on. There are others who would rather strike a balance, so accommodate funding conditions, but still keep personal preferences. So in terms of this sort of a group, you would have a farmer having their own plot where they are doing what they prefer or what they think is going to work, and another plot somewhere else or maybe nearby, which is planted according to grant money that have been given. Of course, there are also others who have mentioned that they have not planted trees themselves, but they've rather decided to sell part of their land to companies that want to plant trees. So similarly, you also see a similar trend in terms of farmers who consider knowledge gaps or lack of knowledge in terms of tree planting as a significant barrier. Those ones who also have sort of like similar decisions to make. For example, whether they would want to stop tree planting until they have enough information. There are others who would take it as an experiment, so they'll start planting. They'll start planting trees on a smaller scale, so that they could learn from it, see what works and what doesn't work, and then they could expand from there. I've already spoken about tenant farmers. So for most of these, the options would be either to plant hedges or just stop tree planting altogether because the land doesn't belong to them. So I'm not sure if you can see my last slide. If you can see it, say so. Right.
Yes, we
So
can see.
okay, good. Right. So we can see here that there is a lot of potential in Scotland to increase tree planting, and these ones, this potential is still underutilized, possibly because for example, grant schemes are not designed or have not been designed to accommodate all sorts of farmers, farmers with different land ownership and other categories. So there is also need to. It's not just about knowledge that would help farmers to plant trees. It's also taking on. I'm calling it a triple approach here. So sort of like focusing on both policy incentives, so we should be talking about so things like grants and subsidies, as well as knowledge and perceptions. So there have been events happening across the country where farmers would meet. They could see what others are doing, learn from their colleagues, and possibly if they have questions, they could ask specific questions. So things like those could also help to increase agroforestry, because the first thing that I'm saying is the farmer needs to be convinced that tree planting is actually going to help them or have an impact on their farm. So the perception, as I have already said, the farmer's perception here regarding trees is also key in terms of agroforestry coverage here. If a farmer doesn't think planting trees is a good thing, then even if you have grant money available, really good amount of money, they're still not going to plant trees because they wouldn't consider that as a good thing to do. Access to information, for example, my colleague here has been talking about optimizing tree planting. That sort of information is needed, but that has to be in some form of easy to understand formats, so that even those who are not those farmers who don't have the background in this sort of work may understand it and use it to make decisions to plant trees on their farm. I think that's my last slide. Right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much to both Salim and Albert for a really fascinating presentation of all your painstaking work over the years. And for such, I'll make Susie me as well, and for such efficient delivery of so much detail. And I think both those presentations together are a really good example within a project of the value of interdisciplinarity. And then connecting that to the presentation that Millie did recently, looking at educational requirements and things, it's really interesting to see how it all ties in. Right, we are a little bit short of time. I realise that some people may need to depart, which is fine. Albert and Salim, I wondered if you're okay to sort of extend for an extra 5 minutes to deal with any questions that arise now.
I'm fine, yeah.
And also whether you're okay to put your emails in the chat so that people can contact you with questions if they have to go at the moment, which would be great, if you don't mind, obviously. And I thought of another couple of things. Salim's invitations to discussion at the end of your presentation, Salim, were, as I said in the chat, seem to open up some really interesting and valuable areas for discussion. So I'll discuss with Salim when we might be able to do that. And to everyone here, I'll send an email inviting you to that if we set it up, if that's okay again with Salim.
That would be amazing. And if you think it helps if we share slides somehow, or maybe the video recording might be enough, I'm not sure.
Yeah, the recording will be available very soon. And also, Albert, I was wondering if you could email me the slides and I could then email those directly to everybody who's present here, of whom I'll have a record, if you're okay with that. And if not, then that's fine. But I will go through, if I can find them, some of the questions in the chat, which I've been having to bother with. There was one that was there and then it disappeared. So just give me a second.
I think it was
thanks.
about...
I see that you've put the emails there. That's great. Okay, there's a question. I'll just start from the bottom because it's the first one that's come to my site. So this is directed at Albert. Do you have any focus on wood pasture creation specifically? It seems a less intimidating option for farmers, but still having a positive effect. That's from Kit.
So is that question with regard to the first grant scheme, or is that like a general question?
Kate, can I invite you to participate in that? It may be that Kate's had to go.
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I put in the chat. Yeah, as part of the forestry creation scheme, I just wondered does it have to be complete? Do you have to plant an entire field, or can it be more patchy, as in wood pasture creation would allow for?
No, I think it can be as patchy as the one planting it would want it to be, especially right now, because there is also room for that sort of a discussion. So, say for example, if the first grant scheme only says you can only plant with this spacing, but you can say no, but I don't want to do that. This is how I want to do my planting. So I don't think it's that specific right now to say this is how you do it. But yes, there is that opportunity for wood pasture creation.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you. Other things in the chat are people sharing information. So both Elliot from Forest Research and Sarah from Woodland Trust Scotland have put in links and ideas to things that those organisations are involved in. So they're not really questions, but they're in the chat to draw your attention to it, anybody who might be interested in following those up. And I think... sorry, Karen.
Okay. So I was about to say that a lot of the existing changes, so the changes that have just been made this year, they are mostly from suggestions that have been done through the work of the Woodland Trust and the Soil Association. There's also been work by the Scottish Forestry, and others. So that has really helped to influence the 2024 changes in terms of grant schemes, especially the payment rates and the selection of tree over tree species. So that is really, really good. Especially, I'm responding to a comment from Sarah. Yeah, it's really, really excellent. Not sure if that has already been seen by people involved in reviewing grant schemes or not.
Sarah, do you know whether it has or?
Not sure if this work has been shared with them. Is this?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure if there was a question in there. I missed that, but yeah, so the report that we put out is very much focused like on the incentives and the policy side of things, and the bottom line was that you know, and you will have picked it up in your research as well, but under the forestry grant schemes and schemes held within the Scottish Forestry, they're just basically not in the right place for farmers and crofters to access them as easily, and the grants that are available, you know, the densities are not as accessible for all farming systems. So yeah, we're very much hoping that the Scottish Government takes some of these payment options and factor them into the new agricultural support scheme, because as I say, workshopped with farmers and crofters, we are hearing that this is what they need to be able to practice more agroforestry in Scotland across a variety of systems as well.
Yeah.
Right, there you go.
Yeah. For example, table 1 of what you have just shared has about 6, if not more. I think there are more options here, which is really a good thing to see, because right now the forestry grant scheme doesn't have a lot of options. So of course, most of those are just put into those 2 existing options, whether you plant at 50 to 200 trees per hectare density, or 300 to 400 trees per hectare density. So they've just kind of been put into those broad groups. But this here would really make a good suggestion for the forestry grant scheme to kind of specify some of the types of agroforestry that are available.
Thank you. There's a brief conversation going on in the chat between Catherine, Elliot, and Stephen about woodland creation and agroforestry. It doesn't really amount to a question, so I think given our time, it is an interesting discussion, so I'll just draw that to people's attention. And there's one more point from Susanna saying, you know, talking about the markets for forestry, and there's been a strong focus on trees for conventional forestry markets, but there'll be a lot of opportunities for other products. And that again is an interesting point when we look at forestry and uses of trees. It might align more easily with farmers' existing activities. Do either of you have anything to comment on that? Okay, then we're almost towards 10 minutes over. So huge thanks to everybody for attending, and thank you. Huge amounts of thanks to Salim and to Albert for really interesting, enlightening and thought-provoking presentations.